Hello everyone and welcome to the GODAN webinar today on behalf of the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to our GODAN webinar series, and today we are very happy to have presenters from the GEOGLAM initiative who are going to talk to us and share their work on GEOGLAM with all of us. So please do join us, and I'm really happy to have colleagues from GEOGLAM, Ian and Alyssa, who are here today with us, and they'll be talking about on their work on the Earth observation for agriculture monitoring, the GEOGLAM initiative, which is one of the great, excellent initiative from the group on Earth observation. So I would like to hand over now to Ian and Alyssa for doing the presentation. Okay.
Great. We're very pleased to be able to give this presentation. And I was just going into the origins and pointing out that GEOGLAM actually came about in response to the G20. In 2011, the agriculture ministers met for the first time in France, and France wanted to have a action plan or a approach to reduce market volatility. And if you remember back in earlier in the 2000s, there was a lot of problems with fluctuating commodity prices, wheat and so on, in response to what was often not very accurate information. So they felt that by having an Earth observation-based information source feeding into markets, it might improve market volatility. But really, GEOGLAM got its start well before that. Throughout the 2000s, really going almost back to the start of GEO in 2005, there's a very strong agricultural community of practice formed, so that when the agriculture ministers of the G20 did come together and put this challenge before us, we were able to respond very quickly and come up with a concept and the technical paper that eventually became GEOGLAM. So GEOGLAM is a global partnership. This is not even complete, but a recent survey, quick survey we did, suggested there are 138 contributors from 62 organizations plus 28 countries and 16 intergovernmental organizations actively participating in the community. These logos here are just contributors to the crop monitor, so it is a very large and very global activity. This is our structure. In fact, we didn't really have this level of formal structure until this year. I'll be talking to you about some of our deliverables, but we've been fairly successful, and that success has bred more demands and more interest from our clients, so that we've been evolving our activities. And that requires a little more formality in the way we're coordinated, and hopefully a little more engagement from some of the players out there that we weren't engaging closely enough. So the GEOGLAM is a very light organization, I guess you'd say. We have the GEOGLAM Secretariat, and that consists of myself. I'm the only fully dedicated person focused on GEOGLAM. And then part of Alyssa's time and a part of Imbal Bekarashev's time, who does the crop monitors out of UMB as well, supporting the Secretariat. So we're pretty small. I guess there's a continuum between underfunded and efficient, and we're somewhere along that continuum. I'm not sure, probably somewhere in the middle. So we're made up of the Secretariat. Then we have a lot of activities going on the technical side around things like data coordination, capacity development, operational development, and so on. And then there's a whole universe of projects that are going on out there that are kind of within that GEOGLAM universe, are funded by various agencies that contribute to GEOGLAM. So even though we have a very small budget at the Secretariat level, there's literally millions of dollars of activities going on in the GEOGLAM universe on a year-to-year basis, supporting the overall vision of GEOGLAM. Then we've created an executive committee this year, which is the implementing body. It consists primarily of co-chairs of the thematic coordination teams, as well as the regional networks, includes myself and so on. And then we have an advisory committee that basically provides some advice and strategic guidance to us, and we hope helps us raise funds as well to support the GEOGLAM Secretariat and the activities overall. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Jump right into kind of our major response to the G20 action plan was to create this crop monitor. It was first released in 2013, so if you recall, the G20 was in 2011. We were able to, within less than 2 years, actually develop the crop monitor. And this covers the four major commodities, food commodities produced in the world, and represents about 80% of the total production of those commodities. So it's the vast majority of agricultural commodity production that's covered. It's a monthly report. It's based on scientific information from Earth observations, integrated with over 40 contributors globally, providing regional expertise and knowledge of the conditions in those areas. And they convene every month with all the data and all their knowledge to come to a consensus assessment, which is then published and made available to something called the Agricultural Market Information System, or AMIS. And AMIS was created the same time GEOGLAM was. And AMIS really represents the national agencies that are responsible for the official stock numbers and so on. So they're kind of the statistical side of the food equation. So we feed our information into them, and it becomes part of the overall global monitor. Now, in part based on the success of the AMIS crop monitor, we began talking to the World Food Security agencies, and by 2016 we were able to launch the crop monitor for early warning, which instead of covering the major producers and marketers of commodities, it covers more of the food insecure regions of the world. And for example, this map is Africa from this May. So it's the same kind of concept, but instead of the four major commodity crops, the crops selected for the food security monitor, early warning monitor, are specific to the region in terms of being important food crops grown within those countries to support the food security in those nations. We use the same kind of legend system and so on, and really in the we probably in 27, 28, 29th monthly monitor, it's really had a major impact, and I think Alyssa will probably talk a bit about that, but out of all the things we've done, this has probably had the biggest impact on global food security. So those are two of our biggest activities, but we also work at the national level, and I think this is quite important. And really, when we look to the future where we're harmonizing these national and global systems, I think building up the capacity at the national level is the key, and also not just national but regional level is going to be the key to the future to improving information at the global level, but also it's really important to have the information being derived and developed within the countries close to the policymakers that can really use it quickly and make a good value out of that information, and we'll have an example or two of that later on. But these two examples, one is the Uganda crop monitor, and the other is just launched last month, is a Horn of Africa crop monitor. Moving on from there. Now, we can't do all this work without really good coordination with the space agencies, and Alyssa is responsible for this area of the project, actually, but I'll briefly just talk about it. So we work with the space agencies through something called the Committee for Earth Observing Satellites, or CEOS. It's a GEO initiative. It's all the public space agencies in the world, or most of them. They come together and coordinate, work together to understand the needs of the user communities and to respond to them in a coordinated way. And we've been working for a number of years now with them very well. They've supported, in particular, our research activities extremely well. And as we're moving forward, we see this relationship evolving now, so that, in fact, they'll be talking more about it, but this year we needed to really review our requirements going forward. And we're now going to be working with them to not just understand our data needs, what satellite data do we need, but also on the service side. So getting a good understanding of what we need right from service to delivery of information. And this is a little bit on that requirements meeting that happened in April. I think Alyssa has a first draft almost ready to circulate for commenting, but this is really a holistic characterization of requirements from data needs to infrastructure, as I said, and the information services to meet our needs. You can't have operational systems, particularly in an environment where technology is moving so fast. The satellites change, the science is always evolving. You really can't do that without a strong research foundation, and the joint experiments for crop assessment of monitoring provides that foundation for GEOGLAM. It consists of a network of over 30 sites around the world that have been working together now. It actually predates GEOGLAM by a year or so, sharing data, sharing science, and doing intercomparison experiments together. The principles of this research network are to collect and share time series data, and the sharing is primarily within the network. These are all scientists producing peer-reviewed publications, so there's a little hesitation to immediately release a lot of the in-situ data in particular right away, but certainly post the study and post-publishing, the intent is to make it available. They're developing common standards in definition reporting methods, working, as I said, with the Committee for Earth Observing Satellites, or CEOS, and they really help break the ground with them in establishing our relationship and how we can work with them to identify priority needs and having the space agencies respond to those. And I guess, really important point of the research network is the R&D is not so much discovery research, but it's research really focused on developing operational implementations. And now it's been going on long enough that the research that was taking place around the beginning of GEOGLAM is now operationalized, and there's tools like coming out of the Sentinel-2 Agri project where we have tools for optical agricultural monitoring that are truly, operational now, and it's been quite gratifying to see this evolution happen from the research to the delivery and the implementation. As I said, it has developed standards and requirements for in-situ data, like standard field configurations. It's just defined what we mean by cropland, which is not a trivial thing. I don't know if many of you people out there are involved with activities looking at cropland, so I'm just trying to get people to agree on what is cropland. It seems easy, but it's not. Things like that. So Alyssa, I think I'll leave this slide to you, and I'll switch it over to you. So you just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
Perfect, will do. Hope everybody can hear me. Ian, can you confirm?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you, Ian. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is essentially sort of the workflow of GEOGLAM. You saw a governance structure earlier, but this is sort of where we're focused. And this diagram can be read from top to bottom as well as from bottom to top. Where we're really headed is science-based information, and that informs everything we do. But the process of getting there begins with the input data, goes through EO data coordination, and then, as Ian outlined, there's the operational R&D activities. And I want to highlight in particular what's right at the core of this and right at the center is the transition of these research activities into operations. And so this is really where our capacity development and operationalization activities lie. Next slide, please. There we go. Perfect. So in sum, just to reiterate that capacity is an integral part of EO adoption in the same way that capacity development is an integral part of our entire vision of enhancing these operational systems. And there are a lot of different ways of thinking about capacity. There's individual capacity, technical capacity, sort of the know-how, the education, and things like that. But there's a lot more to capacity in our vision than that. There's all sorts of things that have to do with institutions, and there's computational capacity as well. So if you look at why there are gaps in EO adoption, some of the drivers that kind of intersect with this capacity challenge are insufficient coverage or acquisition. This is less and less an issue. Sometimes it's actually more a perception than actuality. We have so many missions flying now, we actually have a great deal of data that we're dealing with, whereas just a few years ago, before in particular the Sentinel missions were made operational, we were looking at sort of limited acquisition, and now we have just so much data to choose from that it's really driving both the research and operational use forward at a lightning speed. Again, another perception issue is that EO data have a high cost. In the case of, say, ESA, European Space Agency, and NASA data, this is not true because the data is freely and openly available. There are, of course, costs associated with storing them that you have to take on, but generally the data themselves are free, and that's been a change in the past, say, 5 to 10 years, and we're still doing some outreach to kind of make sure people are aware of that this should not be a barrier anymore for adoption. There's insufficient methods. The methods are growing. We have JCAM and some other activities, Asia Rice, to confront this and to build up the methodologies. There are the bigger things we're seeing now in terms of where the challenges really lie are related to ability to access the data. Sometimes it's a question of even discovering that the data are available for them, and sometimes it's a question of internet speed, or a question of having to create an account, or something that is a barrier that we're working to overcome. And then, of course, there's institutional and communication and political barriers as well. So, there's a long history of monitoring agriculture in different countries. And we know that, often people have entrenched methods that perhaps don't include Earth observations, and they are often there's sometimes some resistance at the institutional level toward moving to a different framework or a different set of analysis tools. But that's another thing that we're working to overcome. And then it's the sort of high cost and access stuff is really, I think, ties in nicely with what GODAN does in terms of looking to make the data open and available for people to use to unlock innovation and unlock knowledge. So in sum, we see developing institutional capacity and individual capacity as complementary activities. They're not really separate activities. So what I mean by that is, while we may hold training sessions, or we may hold webinars, or we may produce training documents, we see that we're not going to get the operational adoption and sustained uptake and ownership without sort of a comprehensive strategy that addresses kind of the long-term ownership within the institution to which these individuals belong. So that means essentially that you have to address a holistic system and address kind of all of the gaps in EO adoption. The great news is that we have a new lead of this capacity development effort. His name's Andy Nelson, and he's at ITC in the Netherlands at University of Twente. Next slide, please. So essentially, we've recognized as a group some of the key priorities for us in the next year really is to implement guidelines for capacity development and knowledge transfer around EO data and methods. As with sort of any effort to augment institutional capacity, it really needs to start with a needs assessment and kind of a state of use. We started undertaking this effort during the requirements meeting that Ian referenced earlier, for which a report should be out any day now. And we began with sort of some surveys and some opportunities for feedback from different operational user systems to really find where their perceived gaps are. And of course, depending on who you talk to in an organization, you're also going to have different feedback. So we've been trying to target people at multiple levels in the organization to get, again, the word holistic, a holistic picture of both the individual capacity that makes up the broader institutional capacity. And we're also kind of trying to set some guidelines for knowledge transfer modalities, pedagogical tools, and in terms of also encouraging people to follow up with the people that they do trainings with to foster a long-term relationship, because we're finding that's really the difference between augmenting capacity and holding a workshop. So we also have recognized that there's a need to coordinate across different capacity development actors in similar regions. We've gotten some feedback from partners in East Africa and other regions that there's a proliferation of data, proliferation of products. There are so many methods, there's training workshops every other week, and it's really difficult for them to parse where that fits into their institutional reporting information needs mandate. And so we are trying to step into this role increasingly in GeoGLAM, and this is why we have a new capacity development lead, where we want to essentially be a curator of these sort of different activities to really listen to the people who tend to be on the receiving end of capacity development to ensure that they not only aren't left out of the process of developing curriculum and activities, but that they're really the ones driving it, and that we can kind of help parse out what might be useful and what might not. We've recognized that a key mechanism for implementation are regional networks. We have 3 that are up and running at the moment: Asia Rice, which is in South and Southeast Asia and focuses on rice. We have GeoGLAM Latinoamerica, and it has an implementing group that's known as the Agricultural Monitoring in the Americas Working Group, which is just spinning up and causing a lot of excitement, I think, in the region, and we focus on all crops. And then AfriGAM, which is a joint contribution between a larger geo activity known as AfriGEOS and GeoGLAM at sort of continental scale in Africa. Next slide, please. So here's an example from the GeoGLAM Latinoamerica network that I was referencing. In March, we held a training workshop on national scale cropland mapping using 30-meter spatial resolution data. And this covered Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. We had participants, 1 to 2 people from each country. We actually had 3 people from Argentina, which was great. After just 3 or 4 days, we had initial accuracies in the maps of about 80%. Some countries were up to 90%. Mexico was a little bit more complicated due to complicated land tenure issues there, but the method is iterative, so we have opportunities to improve. And we're having a follow-up workshop in Brazil during what's known as the AmeriGeos Week, which I can provide more information about if you're interested. And this workshop is a one-day thing that's really focused on accuracy assessment of not just these products, any cropland map products. And so we're really just trying to transfer the full method ownership over to these countries. There's considerations about data processing as well that are larger picture issues, but for now we're working on the sort of know-how and the ownership of the methodology. Next slide, please. And so, as I was mentioning with the regional networks, where we really see this coming from is that, everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. This is known as Tobler's first law of geography. And so that's why we were really targeting these regional networks, as there's shared, they might have similar impacts from climate or weather events, they might have common cultivars, they might have similar soil situations, topographies, language, cultivation practices, and a number of things. And so that's really the foundation of our idea behind regional networks. And this is just an example of how the GeoGLAM Latinoamerica and the Agricultural Monitoring in the Americas community of practice are constituted. It's not just people who are technicians, it's also people who are users of the derived information, and this kind of ties back into this sort of idea to drive things from information priorities from end users to kind of guide the rest of what we do in the program and what we try and implement nationally as well. Next slide, please. So yes, I just wanted to provide some contact information and tell you who the current participants are. Carlos Di Bella from INTA in Argentina. He is the lead of this activity. I'm the coordinator, and I'm happy to have you reach out to me if you're in the region or working in the region and interested in participating. Next slide, please. So next, we're going to get into some impact examples, particularly impact of capacity development activities. Ian mentioned early on that the Crop Monitor for Early Warning has perhaps had the most visibility and the most impact. We're in the news on a fairly regular basis, and there's kind of a growing recognition that Earth observations by providing a synoptic and global perspective, can provide early warning that's really critical to empower decision makers, policymakers, farmers to kind of take in advance action before the crisis, kind of fully unfolds, so that they can ensure kind of long-term food security. Next slide, please. This is an example from Argentina that was in February. The several states in Argentina were experiencing the drought, the most important drought in the last 70 years. It was without precedent. It was damaging 80% of farmlands in Argentina, particularly soy and maize crops, due to drought. Next slide. And essentially, the government was having a hard time diagnosing exactly which areas were affected. The field campaigns were kind of not working, and so the agency responsible for implementing policies is the Ministerio de Agroindustria in Argentina, the Minagro, and they reached out to INTA, which is sort of the research and development portion, and had them physically move their offices into the Minagro offices, so they could collaborate on a daily basis to use Earth observations products to diagnose exactly which areas were affected by the drought. Next slide, please. As a result of the use of this index of evapotranspiration and greenness index, they essentially were finally able to declare an emergency in this area, which resulted in a delay of tax payments for the farmers, which in this area had a really large impact in their ability to essentially, buy seeds for the next season, and not essentially be cut out of their industry for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. Another example is, so for years we've had a strong relationship in Uganda. There's a woman who works she's at the University of Maryland, and she works on the crop monitor coordination team named Catherine Nakalembe, and she's from Uganda. And so she's come to the US for her PhD and goes back and forth between the US and Uganda and all of East Africa, actually, and has really worked hard to gain the trust and ear of many of the people in policy in this area. And in 2017, she was doing fieldwork in Karamoja and came back to the minister and said, look, you guys, there's a state of emergency there. The drought is horrible and a lot of people are at risk of famine there. And the office of the prime minister, she showed them the remote sensing that was visible through the crop monitor, the GEOGLAM crop monitor activity, some indication that vegetation was in poor condition. And essentially, typically what happened is that farmers would continue to try to save their crop even if it was beyond the point of saving, because there wasn't another opportunity for them to have another source of income. And so what this enabled was before there was a food shortage, and before it was sort of a crisis, the use of the satellite data was able to trigger disaster risk financing on the order of $4 million to basically scale up public work projects in this region of Karamoja. And so people were going out and having some employment beyond their farms. They were able to kind of abandon the farms since they were a lost cause, so to speak. It ended up offsetting agricultural losses and supported 31,386 households, or roughly 150,000 people. And it also made a great amount of savings to the Ugandan government as well, because what they normally implement in terms of food aid, they were able to save that money on by acting early. So this was sort of uniquely implemented or uniquely empowered by the use of Earth observations. So Martin Owar, who's the commissioner in the office of the prime minister in Uganda, he said, in the past, we always reacted to crop failure, spending billions of shillings to provide food aid in the region. 2017 was the first time we acted proactively because we had clear evidence from satellite data very early in the season. Said much better than I did myself. That's the point. They see the value, they're implementing it, and now this is a critical part of their ability to continue sort of agricultural and rural development in their region. Next slide, please. I'll pass it back to Ian at this point, and he'll wrap it up.
Okay, this is just another example from this year. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs occasionally puts out special alerts on food security issues. And in February, they put out one for Southern Africa. And it was largely predicated on the crop monitor that you've just seen. And this is the map that they referenced. I believe it was from the February report. At any rate, they identified the area of concern from this. And also they went further to say that not only is this information important, they need, when these hotspots boil up, we really need to be able to go in and do it more often. So once a month even is not often enough when issues are happening and evolving. So they're suggesting weekly or so. And our colleagues at UMD and others, I think, are now looking at how we can do this, how we can respond quickly to these hotspots, these emergency situations, to provide more rapid information and more often. So, as I said, a lot of the stuff you've seen so far on the crop monitors, it's really qualitative information. It takes science-based data and information from satellites and it integrates it with the human knowledge and creates these monthly reports. But we're getting pushed in more and more from the market side for more quantitative information. As well, we see the new policy drivers coming out of things like the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and disasters. And we see them pushing for exactly the same information. And the nice thing is that the stuff we track as agricultural monitors is all fundamental information, and the information supports these things across the board. There's an example I used yesterday. It was just fresh in my mind, so I threw it in, but I was talking to a symposium here looking at GEO and the Paris Climate Accord, talking about adaptation. This just shows one example in Canada, how soybean production in the Western prairies has expanded between just 2009 2015 incredibly, moving north and westward. Soy is a long season crop, and due to many things, but primarily due to climate change, we see it changing to such an extent that the range of crops has expanded. And this is happening all over the world and is being kind of expressed on the landscape in different ways. And our community can really contribute through this type of monitoring to, again, climate change, sustainable development goals, and disasters in terms of tracking impacts of drought and so on. So just getting back to how things have evolved, this is from 2014. It's an assessment we did of that actually Alyssa led, that looking at the needs for satellite data. And at that time, we identified a bunch of key areas that were still lacking and needed support. And this is only 2014. We're now in 2018, and the game has totally changed. And I think Alyssa alluded to this. We are no longer limited by the amount of data we can access. In fact, there's so much data, that's our biggest challenge, is how do we handle the big data? How do we integrate the masses of open, free data with the in situ data that we're now starting to develop methods to get crowdsourced information in? How do we handle all this? And that's really where a lot of our new focus is. It's more on the infrastructure side. So with that, over the last year, we've been discussing new priorities as we move forward. We kind of finished our first 5-year period, and we're looking forward to the next 5 years. And of course, number one, as I've already mentioned on that list, is the development of these more quantitative metrics on things like crop area, crop type, how is the crop doing, yield forecasting, that sort of thing. Not just the current state, but it's very important to start to track this not within just a growing season, but to look between growing season and long term. And then as we mature, we expect to do more on the forecasting side, looking to forecasting how we expect the agricultural landscape will evolve and change in response to, in particular, climate change. Another big priority is capitalizing on the open data by using and implementing information technology, things like cloud processing and data cube systems. We also realized we need to do a better job of implementing a knowledge management system, and this should speak well to the GODAN objectives. We've done a lot of peer-reviewed research, spun out a lot of really good information, but we really need to start to capture that in a way that's meaningful to the people that are trying to implement operational systems. So this year, we're fairly aggressively moving forward with identifying an approach to capturing that knowledge in a way that's meaningful to the variety of clients we have out there. And as I've already said, key to really evolving and improving going forward is strengthening, expanding the regional networks and supporting national capacity building. So with that, I think that's, we've been talking at you plenty long enough, and it might be good time to switch to some questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you very much, Alyssa. This is a very informative and very relevant webinar for the GODAN community, and we are very happy to have Ian and Alyssa share this informative presentation with all of us. So I hope now it's time for questions. So I will welcome colleagues who are listening in. A lot of colleagues are joined by the web interface. So can I request everyone who want to ask any questions to please type your questions in the chat window, and then we can ask. I can pass that questions to Ian and Alyssa to answer. So while we are waiting for that, I have one question for both of you, Ian and Alyssa, because I saw one of the slides you were talking about the capacity development is now in contact in ITC. ITC, someone is doing it. So, did I understand correctly? Is that you have a network with all these universities, but the person in ITC is like the nodal point to coordinate this, or how does that work?
Exactly. So if I go back to this diagram, kind of our structure, we have all these thematic coordination teams, and one of them is capacity development coordination. Now, most of them have leadership, and some of them don't still. This is kind of our aspirational model of where we're going. So one of the areas that was, it was kind of led in an ad hoc way. By getting Andy involved now, we have secured more focused leadership in the capacity development coordination, and he'll be leading the working group around that. And if there's people out there that are involved in that area, we're certainly welcome anybody and all. We're a very open community, and we're all held together by common interests and good intent. And it's worked really well so far. So if you do have an interest in joining us, I think you'll find it a very rewarding experience. Alyssa, do you want to add anything?
Sorry, I had to unmute. No, I think you've summarized it. You know, you've emphasized that we're an open community, and that you know, efforts are best efforts. It's volunteer. It's toward a common goal. People get value out of participating in this. They get to improve methods, and they get to drive the research agenda. They get to give feedback to space agencies about the types of data that they need and influence both acquisition plans as well as future mission development. So, which, you know, kind of feeds back to strengthening your own organizations as well. And so there's lots of reasons to become involved, and we're happy to have people's contributions.
Thank you. And another question I have is, because I was very impressed by that Ugandan case study you presented. It was really, because it showed, you know, the real life impact these initiatives have, you know, are making, and it is very important. You know, these kind of use cases are more broadly promoted in the, you know, through the GODAN, and we will make sure, you know, other people are aware of these kind of activities happening. So maybe, you know, did you get any other kind of interest from other countries in Africa or Asia following this report and things like that? Yeah,
we're working with Tanzania. We're working with Kenya. Who else in Africa? Well, South Africa, of course. Alyssa, you probably know better than I about.
Yeah, we've just actually, as of last month, May 19th, and you can see this on our, we have a Twitter account for the Crop Monitor. The main Twitter account that you see on the slide is GeoGlam writ large. Very easy from there to find the Crop Monitor's Twitter, but it's just Geo Crop Monitor. May 19th of last month, we launched the East African Crop Monitor. which is being coordinated by RCMRD, I believe. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. I know Catherine is actually on the line, so if she sends a chat to disagree, we'll know that I'm wrong. But we've transitioned it over to them. They're running it, you know, so the crop monitor coordination team and development team is at the University of Maryland in terms of sort of the interface and the development of the reports and whatnot. But it's a great success for us is when a country or regional office takes over the reporting, takes over all of that. And so, yeah, we now have the East Africa Crop Monitor, and with really great adoption.
The beautiful thing of that process is that then those people in country with the experience of what's going on using the technology will then report up to the national or the regional and then global level, and that improves our global reporting. So it's all connected quite well.
Yes, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Alyssa. Now I have questions coming from the participants. Martin is asking, who is developing the model? I guess you need vegetation development over time. How is regionalization done? Like other parameters like weather, crop, soil types, etc.
Yeah, this is a good question, and it speaks to, I get this all the time. There's a perception that we don't share our data, but in fact, we don't actually produce any data. Right now, we're just producing information, which are the crop monitor reports, but we could consume a lot of open data. So we consume data products from the Joint Research Center in Europe, NOAA in the U.S., UMD, NASA have a number of products, NDVI products, and so on, that all are brought to bear when we're developing these. It's not so much a modeling approach as a weight of evidence approach. Alyssa, you want to add to that?
I actually didn't catch the question. Sorry. So I think you probably answered it.
It's more a general question on who is developing the model, and I think.
Yeah, I think Ian answered it perfectly. Then I mean, we are not at this. Our goal and our role is not to be this producer of data sets or models. Our goal is to sort of curate the information into synthetic products, or synthetic information products, specifically like the crop monitor, or to synthesize Earth observation requirements into recommendations to the space agencies. That's really what we do. Or, for example, we're launching this knowledge management system, and a component of that would be for us to provide guidelines for minimum documentation for data sets, as well as validation protocols for us to say, okay, this meets a GEOGLAM standard. But it wouldn't be produced by us, it would be produced by somebody else, and access is mediated by the producing agency.
So that's where we are now, but going forward, I talked about where we see our community going. A lot of the nations that are feeding in already are doing more quantitative assessments, and at that point, we see us as we branch out to actual crop area assessments, yield forecasting, and that sort of thing. In the long term, we see us eventually producing data sets and making those openly available, but they'll still be derived from a lot of these open data products and open satellite imagery and so on.
Thank you both. So there are many questions coming in now. So the next question is from US Stefani Negelo, and the question is, I would like to know, how can someone volunteer online with your organization?
That's good. You want to take that, Alyssa?
The question was, how can they volunteer online?
Yeah, how can they volunteer?
With GEOGLAM.
But, okay, so if the question is how to become involved and become a part of GEOGLAM, to date, to be involved in the organization writ large is sort of just an indication of interest and sort of, a commitment on your behalf to be engaged. It's sort of straightforward. We have, if you go back to the governance diagram of GEOGLAM, we have these thematic coordination teams and to get to kind of the level of leadership in the coordination teams and to get onto our executive committee, that typically comes with an invitation from the Secretariat because you've sort of demonstrated that you have in-kind resources to support your time as sort of that limited additional effort on top of what your job description already entails. And so yeah, essentially that's kind of the program writ large. In terms of becoming engaged in the crop monitor, that is really driven by whether you have the operational mandate within your country or within your region to provide information on crop conditions, because that's a much more sort of formalized effort. If you're, say, a research person or whatnot, that's maybe not the best place to engage, but like if you're in research, getting involved in JCAM or on one of the thematic coordination teams could be a really nice way to get engaged. And so in sum, the mechanism for doing that would be to reach out to Ian as director, I would think, and then we can go kind of from there.
Yeah, so as I said, we welcome everybody, and depending what your area of interest is, you can approach me and I can be the broker and make sure you're aware of what's going on. We have regular meetings, or we have meetings, of usually a few a year, and there's lots of opportunity to start to get engaged, test the waters if you like, as well as become more involved in some of the working groups, again, depending what your interest is. So just give me a shout and we can see how we can help you find your niche within our community.
Thank you for that, answering the question. So the next one is from Ahmad Sadallah, who is asking, Google has a cloud-based platform which handles your big data. Have you ever managed to test it?
We're at the place now where we're starting to look at a number of approaches to cloud services. There's an emerging project within Europe looking at this. Our next major meeting is at the end of August in Sanya, China. It's being hosted by RADI out of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and it's totally focused on infrastructure. So all the computing infrastructure, cloud, cubes, as well as the knowledge management side. So we're still figuring this landscape out, and I think we definitely largely behind a lot of the opportunities that are out there, which might be a good thing actually. But there's so much going on right now. We're really trying to figure out how to engage. There's many cloud pilots. There's many many cube pilots and many cloud implementations. There's a thematic exploitation platforms by ESA. There's the Diaz and Copernicus activities, work in NASA and so on. So I think there won't be one size fits all, but we'll be working with within those opportunities to find how we can move the bar forward, because I don't think it's trivial either to take our approaches and just transfer to a cloud system. There's going to be a bit of research required and so on. And that's another thing we're doing in the fall. We have our annual research meeting in Chinese Taipei this time, and we'll be working towards developing the research agenda for the next 5 years that will move us from where we are now to those aspirational goals I talked about and priorities looking forward.
Thank you. So the next question is from Maninder Singh Dhillon, who is asking, I have a question with the early crop monitoring. How important is remote sensing in crop yield detection, and which models do you think should be suitable for this?
The primary source of information is NDVI. And then the soil moisture products, evapotranspiration, stress index, and so on are important as well. Alyssa, do you want to go into any more detail on any of that, more than I can get to?
Yeah, I'll just say that, you're right, the primary source is NDVI. There's a number of models that different kind of models that integrate different kinds of information, and we're trying to also improve within seasonal forecasts for these kinds of models as well. There's been some interesting work done at the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service on, there was a paper in remote sensing of environment that sort of compared different remote sensing indicators, NDVI, precipitation anomaly, soil moisture, all this sort of stuff, in terms of what its contribution was to final yield error. And so you might, if you're interested, the person who asked this, you might look at that and see the contribution of these different metrics we can sense from space in sort of nascent research that's been done so far in this domain.
And again, I'll say, if you want to get engaged in the research community around GeoGLAM, let me know. We have two very capable co-chairs of the JCAM network. We have ongoing, right now, really active in radar, SAR, intercomparison experiments, and so on. So if you have any interest in research around agricultural monitoring, let us know. And as I said, we have a meeting this fall. It should be quite a interesting meeting for people who have an interest in this area.
Thank you. Another question again from Maninder Singh, who is asking, for students who want to do a PhD in crop field monitoring, what is the procedure for them?
I'll let you take that one, Alyssa, because you're sitting in the center of that universe.
Right. Yeah. That's a big question. So that would be a little bit independent, I think, from what we're doing within GeoGLAM. But I don't know, it's going to be different. The process would be different from country to country. But in the U.S., you typically have to take an exam, a standardized test, and then you submit your transcripts and you apply. I would encourage you, regardless of whether you're going to a U.S. institution or internationally, to build a relationship with a mentor in advance with whom you'd like to work, and they will champion your application more than likely. And so then that way you get to work on what you're interested in, and you get in the university that you're interested in being in.
Thank you, Alyssa. Another question from Nagelu is on, do the global agriculture monitoring work with grassroots organizations to impact a country, or it only works with government agencies?
Both, in fact, depending which one you're talking about. Definitely, we strive to work within country agricultural agencies that are doing the work, but certainly NGOs are very important, particularly for the early warning crop monitor, both at the international level and the regional level in particular. You want to add anything, Alyssa?
No, I think I think you got it. I think that's accurate. We don't just strive to target kind of national level or global level policy. We're also trying to, increasingly seeing opportunities, especially as the data become finer and finer resolution, we're seeing opportunities to impact decisions on a more local scale.
Yeah, we see the big international organizations like World Food Program and so on being not just feeding and supporting the early warning crop monitors, but being some of the chief clients. So it's kind of a nice circular situation there. They're feeding in, helping us create better information at the same time. They're some of the major beneficiaries of that information in the end.
Oh, interesting. Thanks. And I have one question, because I was again going back to the your future plans for data cubes and things like that. So I was listening to that Africa Open Data Cube and things. So
yeah.
Are you already in touch with them, or are you looking at different kind of aspects?
I was literally in the room.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're involved, and particularly UMD and Alyssa and her colleagues at UMD are definitely involved on the ground, and Alyssa referenced to some of the work that Catherine's been doing, and that's definitely going to be linked to the data cube.
Good.
My interest is to figure out, I think they started with the goal of getting 20 data cube iterations in 5 years. This is
Right.
They're up to 16 after about a year and a bit.
Right.
So, and they're got the point now where you can have these data cubes pop up in a matter of days. So the technology hurdles are becoming less, but it's more the human side. So I'm interested to see, how do we take all these pilots that are popping up everywhere and start to come up with a cohesive picture to build what we want to build is a global system of systems. How do we link all these things together to have kind of a more comprehensive, eventually global view?
No, I think that's very interesting because again, it links to the capacity development activities and maybe like train the trainers, but something which is sustainable and scalable at the same time. So I'd be interested to learn from your experiences on this as well, because we are also very keen to, because we work mostly on the developing world, and we are very looking for models which can be scalable and sustainable at the local level.
Yeah.
So that's why we have been focusing on our capacity development activities, especially on the geo side, on trying to not only use open data but also the open tools as well.
Yes.
So, for example, countries in Africa and Asia, they can just they can use free and open tools and build their infrastructures and hopefully customize them and scale them up in the future as well. So we'll be very, very interested to learn from you and share experiences and having you involved in the capacity development activities as well. So there is more synergies for the future as well.
For sure, and we want to work with you. And crowdsourced data is really exciting when you think of the big data universe that we're now moving into. And just in Canada, my previous job, we had a crowdsourced application where we brought in information from surveys, media, and so on, and aggregated that. We actually mapped it, and then we integrated that with the biophysical information we had, and it's very powerful.
Yes.
So I think we're just starting to scratch the surface in development of tools and sharing the information capture tools, so on. It's going to be a very exciting future.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely agree. And because now we are reaching the end of our 1 hour, so we will a lot of interesting questions coming in. And what I will suggest, colleagues, is please post the questions into the mailing list as well, and I will make sure Ian and Alyssa are copied into the discussion so they can answer you more your questions directly. So I want to, on behalf of the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition, I want to thank both Ian and Alyssa for giving their time and presenting this very informative ideas to the community, which I hope will stir more ideas among you, and feel free to bring your ideas and more information you need to the mailing list for discussion. So we will continue the discussions later. I also want to thank our colleagues in CTA, Chipo and Chris and other colleagues who are hosting our webinar. So thank you, CTA, for hosting these webinars, and I want to thank all colleagues who have joined this webinar today, and we hope to see you later in our future webinars. So thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.